Pilot Boys in the building. Welcome to the Pilot Boys podcast, where you'll get the real on all things sports, music, and pop culture. I'm Mekadon here with my co-host V.
I'm a mentality for life.
Today is June 11th, 2020. Thank you guys for tuning in. I know you could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with us. We are quarantined and social distancing still due to this coronavirus pandemic, but we're still figuring out a way to bring you a show at all costs. Today's show is epic. It is a must listen and a must share. We have police officer from Central Ohio, Chris Hughes, and we talk about everything from defunding the police, George Floyd, what he thinks his obligation should be to society, being a Black police officer, who should be policing, what should be happening in certain situations in policing, and so much more. You really do not want to miss this. We also hit some news and notes. We talk about the coronavirus and its effect on sports, the NBA coming back, Michael Jordan, college football also potentially being back, the Democrats kneeling charade with kente cloth, and a little bit more. Shout out to our Patreon subscribers. Don't forget now that our Patreon subscribers will get our episodes on Wednesdays a night early. If you want to support, you can donate at www.patreon.com/Pilot Boys Podcast. Don't forget, grab some wristbands at shop.pilotboys.com. Let's go.
Where the Pilot Boys at? Pilot boys, we get on up. We don't fly, boys, we getting up. So high, Pilot boys, we get on up. We don't fly.
You are listening to the Pilot Boys podcast. We are joined by a very special guest today, Chris Hughes, who is a law enforcement officer from Central Ohio. Welcome to the show, Chris. How you doing?
Hey, how y'all doing, fam?
Good. Thanks for joining us, man. We obviously this is a very unique time in history, right? And I think that when you take a step back, sometimes you actually understand that this is not just, this is something that's happening now, but, this is something that I think 20, 30, 40, 100 years from now will be written about in history books. And there's so many different angles to it. And we thought it's very important to kind of get the perspective of a law enforcement officer, and particularly a Black one, because I think that there are a lot of issues, obviously, surrounding race, but also policing. So I guess before we could jump into some of the more kind of questions of the day, tell us a little bit about how and why you decided to become a law enforcement officer.
As a kid growing up on the east side of Columbus, I really didn't have issues with the police myself, but I lived in an area where there was a lot of crime, and I saw them frequently. But my mom would always say, hey, if they're there, you shouldn't be. So I would always, if I see something that looked like it was going to go left, I'd exit stage left myself. Right. But did a lot of sports. So fast forward a little bit, high school, and then college at OSU. During my college years, I actually went to school for dentistry. Ended up changing that when 9/11 hit. We all were there together, and 9/11 hit, and I was literally about to leave school to join the military. Spoke to my mother. She was like, hey, you got a full scholarship. Go ahead and get that degree. As soon as you're done, go do what you want to do. Needless to say, this led me into a criminology, law enforcement mode. So I did other social work, and at an event at my church, I met a commander with the agency I'm with, and we talked about, changes in the community and what we would do to change the community. And, I wrote several things, several things that we do now, getting out of the cruiser, being on bikes, being in the community, going to events. And he just was like, you ever thought about doing this? And I was just like, well, nah, not really. I don't think it's for me. And he was like, you just gave me all these ideas and it's not for you. Okay. So, months later, discussing it with family and friends and, just getting some people's shock reaction. Like, you want to do this? You sure? And I'm just like, I think it will work. A lot of like-minded people. I'm just trying to change the world, especially, and, on your level. So And needless to say, I jumped in. So
talk about that real quick in terms of what do you actually, because there might be a disconnect. I think there is a disconnect in certain communities in terms of what the role of police officers are and what it should be. What are your thoughts in terms of kind of what you understand it to be the actual role, and maybe if there's a disconnect in society in terms of what they feel like the role actually is? So
I agree with that. There is no trust in some communities, and unfortunately, from my experience, it is the communities of color, and we have to fix that. The primary role of a police officer is to serve and protect, and sometimes the serve portion gets lost on the community and sometimes the officer due to experience they may have had in the community they serve. For me, though, the service portion is first and foremost. I come from a family that's all about service. Father did Parks and Recs and Franklin County Children's Services, and mother always was doing some volunteer or work in the community serving kids or whatnot. So my whole family is like that. And, just pretty much just, that service aspect. I mean, you see everything you see on TV is enforcement. But there's that service piece and protection piece, because we're there to protect people from the ills and sometimes from themselves. So the history, though, there is history that says otherwise with some officers. So I get it. Like I said, I'm from a community where I saw a lot of criminal things and law enforcement had to be there. So that's my take.
And tell us a little bit about that. You mentioned earlier that there's a lot of mistrust, specifically in communities of color. And you grew up in one of those communities. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about your mindset in terms of what law enforcement was growing up and how that shifted once you start thinking about actually becoming a police officer.
So, seeing what they did, like I told you, I was always out of there before they started doing anything. When I heard sirens or cruisers rolling, I got up out of there, whether it was in the house, to my cousin's house down the street, to the rec center. I was out. I had a bike and I got out there. But the shift happened when I actually started seeing these men and women do their job and actually learn who they were. I did ride-alongs, and then one of my mentors, somebody I looked up to, came to church. We were members at the same church, and he showed up and he was like, "I heard you trying to get one of these," and he showed me that badge, and I just was like, "Yo, yeah, right, for real," And he was like, "Yeah." So there was a lot of, I don't know, it felt like a lot of mistrust or just a lot of the things I thought when I saw this individual have that, because his character was something that I admired. I was like, man, I'm making the right decision. But yeah, there was a lot of things that I saw that was just like, and the thing is that a lot of times the folks ain't doing always the right thing either. That's one thing we talk about amongst our African American officers, is that we got to check our own community too, and that's hard being a law enforcement officer of color to tell others, hey, we got to look at our community too, because they'll be like, oh nah, you being a police officer. Mm-hmm. Now and I'm just like, I'm just telling the truth. I mean, mm-hmm. There's things that we do as a community that's not cool, and the first thing folks do is grab that phone and call 911. Mm-hmm. So for as much as a lot of us that don't trust them and things of that nature, we still gotta call the people that we pay to help us, So
let me ask that too, because that actually brings up another interesting point. Is kind of about maybe the relationship with the communities that you're policing. How important do you think it is for police officers to either be from or familiar with the communities and the people that they're actually policing?
So I think it's absolutely vital for you to be familiar with the people you're policing, because even though you may not live there, you are a part of that community. You are a vital person and part of that community. People trust you. They want to get to know who you are. You know, they trust you with their family, their kids, their lives, their property, their businesses. You are a part of that community, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
By you taking that oath and joining that section of town that you're protecting, you are a part of that community. And sometimes it takes a while for that bond to be built, but you need to be consistently working on that relationship with the community. And that's with all relationships in life. You should, if it's something you value and you hold important to you, you should be working on building and strengthening that relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. And specifically, like, you are kind of a recruiting coordinator for the Columbus Police. So in how you recruit and determine, hey, this might be a good candidate, what are the things or qualities that you look for specifically?
So honestly, as long as they are qualified to pass our minimum qualifications, they can take it, and it's objective, and it's a test. A lot of the character traits are evaluated later, and background, and that's something I'm not a part of. So
okay.
And in terms of like, kind of, there's so many issues when it comes to kind of the concept of policing and the understanding of policing and the understanding of just relationships in this country generally. And one of them that you can never ever escape in any context, especially in any institutional context, is race, right? And the effects of race, and not just race, like, oh, I'm black, you're white, but also how race has been used as a weapon at different points in times, how race has been used as a way to create divisions. And then also even race has been used in a way, to create policies or not create policies. How do you actually, because you're a smart dude, right? And I know that you think beyond kind of just the surface. How do you evaluate kind of, even in certain communities, like the history, right? The history of why a community is going through what it's going through, why there are actually infestations of drugs, why people are committing crime. How do you actually evaluate that? And then still know that you still have to kind of do your job.
Again, when I think about my humble beginnings, I know people come from humble beginnings, and you can find a gem anywhere. It doesn't necessarily matter where they grew up or how they grew up, but it matters about their experiences and how they look and care about people. And that's very important. We know there are certain communities that have had terrible things happen to them due to the police. I mean, heck, I think about, Black Wall Street, the historical concept of that. People think about things like that, where our own, military took action against us because we're doing well. And it's just like, how could you ever, but there's tons of people that join the military every year, So I really just believe it is the individual's interpretation, and then they'll go for what they want. If they want to be part of law enforcement, they do it. If they want to be part of the military, they do it. You guys are doing what you want to do and what you love. So it really all depends on the individual. But I do understand those historical concepts and how that can deter someone from wanting to do this. And then you also have family that may have went through, bad situations, and they share that with you. And then you'll develop a disdain, a mistrust. And that's hard to shake. Yeah. It's hard to shake when it's happened to your uncle, your brother, your father, mother. Right. So I mean,
let's talk about also kind of the experiences in the community, for example. So let's say you're in the community and I'm just going to give an example, and you see kind of a young person, or kind of committing crimes or whatever, and then you kind of understand that community, and you realize, okay, well, he comes from the schools in this neighborhood aren't good, the mentors in this neighborhood aren't good. There's not a lot, and again, not to say this is excuse, so to speak, but it's kind of like the reasons why certain communities are the way they are, again, historically. How do you reconcile that, like, with trying to help in that community and protect, and also criminalize certain things, but also understanding that these people circumstances have been in a lot of ways fixed against them?
Right. So I think it's a two-way street. So when I got on, I actually ended up going back to the neighborhood where I grew up, and serving. I developed a lot of new relationships, maintained the older ones. And then I also jumped into a bunch of mentorship programs. So we do a lot of mentorship because, like you said, that child or whoever is doing those things, I mean, maybe they don't have somebody to help them. Maybe this is just the way they know, and it's upon us to help them. You obviously don't save everyone, but I've had a lot of great interactions to where I've had a family friend or just somebody I met through work, like, hey, I got my son and he's going through some things. He's starting to do this. Can you talk to him? Mm-hmm. Can you talk to him? And then I always ask, like, so do you want the cop or do you want the meat? And they're like, both. Yeah. Both. And it's just like, really, it's help, and it's a human emotion, and it's just help. And so for me, again, I think I do things a little uniquely just because of my perspective. Mm-hmm. But the thing though is that there's a lot of us that do this, and the pub isn't as great, obviously, because it's like, that's what y'all supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. That's the sentiment among people, is that's what y'all supposed to be doing. Yeah. Well, no, my job description says this, but you have to have a loving heart, and we mentor lots of kids through our programming, and even older, man. You can be a 21-year-old and be lost. You're for sure. You're classified as an adult, but you don't have a positive person in your life. And I used to say role model because people are role models. I don't know about that. I say positive person because all people are flawed. Mm-hmm. So and the onus is on both. It's a two-way street. So that person, the child or the adult who's involved in that criminal act or whatever, I mean, the circumstances are tough sometimes, but you still have to find that integrity. And if I see you struggling, I gotta help. I gotta see my fellow man, human being, humanity, and help, because you gotta love people too, man. Right. That wins for sure.
Absolutely.
One of the unique challenges I see with being a law enforcement officer is the power that comes with it, and kind of the authority, right? Like, and how just human beings, when they're given a certain level of power over other people, how inevitably that becomes a challenge. And you see that often in my experiences, many experiences with police officers essentially being bullies or abusing that power. They have a badge, they have a gun, you don't, right? How is that, and you work in it, I know you see that mentality. How is that mentality dealt with within police departments to kind of help check people's power?
How's the mentality dealt with? Yeah. To be honest, in my career, I've done this for almost 15 years. I've seen it a few times. It's incumbent upon the other officers to step in. Unfortunately, there are people that, make it on the force, and they do that. But for the most part, it's incumbent upon others to step in with a badge and a shield and speak out against it. That's my take on it. I disagree. I don't like that. But as you said, it does happen. You definitely have to acknowledge that. And then, those people that do that should face some type of counseling or discipline. That is not your job. You are not to be a bully. You are to respect the people that you serve, and you are to hold that power that you have, with distinction. That those Spider-Man and all that, with great power comes great responsibility. I know that's the thing, but that's so true. Mm-hmm. It's so true. And a lot of times you get, a 21-year-old or a 22-year-old that's never had any real power in their life. And now they can make a traffic stop, pull everybody out, have people at gunpoint, but they also have the power to, save a life, to, stop a shooting, stop a robbery. It all depends on how you use that power. And unfortunately, that does happen. There's no way to refute it. But like I said, there needs to be some type of counseling. And then if that's not working, discipline, or you need to be gone. Period. There's a lot of jobs to where you do that one time and that's it. Mm-hmm. It seems like in our profession, you get multiple chances when you mess up. And not that I'm saying that's right or wrong. That's just how it is. And, from what I'm seeing out here with protests and stuff, people want that to change.
Yeah. And why is that people are given such a long road?
I can't hear you.
I said, why is it that officers, can
you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. V was gonna. I think he was gonna ask, why is it that I guess maybe just structurally, why officers particularly are given such a long leash, so to speak. And like you said, in many other professions, you mess up once, you're out of there. Correct. But we see some of these cases, and you look back at the history of a police officer, and they have tons and tons of complaints against them, and all kinds of stuff. But yet they're allowed to continue on. What is it about? Is it about the structure or the culture that kind of allows that to continue?
So I think it's more so the policy, and then whatever the contract is that the department has with the city that allows those things. There's a lot of money put into each police officer that is money from the citizens. So from the start of the process through the academy, through, their on the job training, and through the year, there's a lot of, thousands and thousands of dollars poured into each individual officer. So for you as a city, as citizens, to pour all that money into that one individual, and then they mess up, you want to, keep that investment and, just try to continue to fix those issues before they get rid of them. Now, if you do certain egregious things, you should be gone. There is no counseling. There's no things. But if they're minor issues, a lot of times cities and departments feel they can counsel them. When it turns into a pattern, that's when I guess it's called like progressive discipline. So things, ramp up. But in some cities that we've seen, it doesn't seem to take it all, and they maintain their position. And those type of things I don't really understand myself. If you're doing consistent acts and there's no rhyme or reason for why you're doing them, you need to leave.
Chris,
that's my take.
This is a very refreshing conversation, because I think that, first of all, and I'm sure you hear this all the time about, not all cops are bad, and it's just a few bad apples, and so on and so forth. And one of the issues that we as citizens have with that is that, and a lot of it, Chris Rock did this. It's funny, but it's a good point. It's like, you can't have 5% of bad apples as a pilot in the pilot industry. Like, oh well, I'm just not going to land today. That people's lives are at stake. So the stakes are also higher. But I think the bigger thing is acknowledgement of issues, right? Because I think, and honestly, to me, I feel like if more officers were willing to do that publicly, right? And I understand there's, we're going to talk about maybe like the code in a second, but I think if more officers were willing to do that publicly and say some of the things publicly, like, listen, we're not perfect. There are a lot of things that go on that I don't necessarily agree with. That doesn't mean that I want you to vilify me, but I do acknowledge the things that are happening in the community. I think that would be a huge step to kind of healing and mending certain relationships. Because part of the problem that people have, and now I'll ask about the kind of code, is that they feel like even when the good officers know that certain bad things are happening, they still refuse to say anything, either in that moment, like you said earlier, about stepping in the situation, or after it. Talk a little bit about that, because it seems like there's a, even if there's not a official code of silence or whatever, the blue code of silence or whatever they call it, there seems maybe there's a pressure somehow where people don't feel like they're going to say anything, and that just creates mistrust in the community.
Yeah, and so I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about. And to me, my personal opinion is I kind of equate it to the no snitching. I know y'all know about that. That's how I equate it. Not right.
Yeah,
definitely wrong. And more people should come forward. Like you said, though, there are unfortunate consequences that people are afraid of. Afraid of being a target, afraid of not getting their backup, afraid of just being left out on an island and blackballed. You can't get promotions. Like I see all this stuff on social media that is going on in other departments to where they can hold you back. You can test well. You can do all kind of great things. You can get commendations. And just because they don't like you or what you've done, to call out others who are in the wrong. And I'm not a fan of it. I know it does exist. It seems to be just something that's there. But I agree with you that more officers calling people out on that and saying, yes, this is real, and that, it needs to be eliminated. It needs to happen. It needs to happen more. Me, I'm one of those people that I do that. And I get a target on my back sometimes. But I do a lot of good things too. And, it balances that out. But, I'm definitely a believer in what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And if I see something wrong, I need to say something. And I hope and pray that more like myself will continue to do that. And then there's another side of where there's people who are like, I've never seen it, so I don't know that it's real. And I mean, that's kind of a blind eye approach. And saying that, hey, well, since I've never actually seen it, I don't know that it exists here. And for me, I'm not going to hear this over and over and over and over and then believe, oh, it's still not real. I just can't do that. So
yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And I wanted to go into the concept of profiling, right? Specifically against people of color. It almost seems like there's a lot of preconception when amongst a lot of police officers of a different sense of danger when they're pulling over a person of color, right? I've had experiences where I've gotten pulled over and the first question the officer asked me is, do you have any bombs, explosives, or firearms in your car? And it seems like there's an immediate sense of fear from the police when they profile and they see a person of color that they're called for, versus a white person. You almost always see it being peaceful when it's a Caucasian being arrested, but a lot of the confrontation and violence happens when it's amongst people of color. Why do you think that is? And how do police departments work toward addressing that issue?
So what I know is that implicit bias is a real thing. Learned about that, how people have misconceived notions about people from what they've seen on TV, what they've heard from family, how they've grown up. And there is a lot of that. It exists, is very heavy. A lot of departments are now, I say in the last 10 years, getting real heavy in the training of that, learning about cultural sensitivity. Those are things that a lot of people are just, those misconceived perceptions exist. And we're, trying to help people identify that in themselves so that when they do make that traffic stop or they do show up at that house, that those aren't the first words out of their mouth. Again, it does happen. I mean, V, I know that's a horrible experience and I wish it didn't happen. But it happens. And I'm sure there's, rolls of tape. I was going to say, but like tons of video that shows where that happens. But those are identifiers for some things. And, is plain speak. It's plain speak when they ask that. But like I said, it's really the implicit bias that is driving that. And sometimes it is fear. I mean, if you the last thing you saw is a male white shoot somebody before that, then the next time you pull over a male white, you may have that issue. You know what I mean? Or, you saw somebody, do some heinous act, and you may need counseling before you go back in the field. So, I mean, there's a lot of that, V. And yeah. I mean, I just acknowledge that exists. So,
and speaking of that too, one of the things I just saw a graphic recently, this week, that just struck me in the heart, because I'm born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. And, I have a deep affinity for kind of, the Buckeyes and everything. Everybody knows that, right? But I saw a graphic that had kind of the highest rate of police murders against African Americans. Yeah. And Columbus was by far, in a way, number one in the whole nation. Yep. And again, let's just assume for the sake of this discussion that data is legitimate and it was done well and all that. What do you think when you hear that? I mean, literally, where do you even go from that from that, in terms of addressing what that actually means?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the true answer. I don't know. I saw the graphic maybe a few months ago, and my first question was like, where's that data coming from? And then I did research to find out like if that was true. And obviously you can't get all the data from all the departments that are involved in that city. Right. So that's a terrifying statistic if it is true. I honestly, I would go and talk to different communities just to, just say, hey, I don't know if this is true or not, but, let's work together and figure out how we can lower this. If this is actually true. That is, like I said, is a very scary stat. And it's something that no city would be proud of, especially being a black man from the city like yourself. It's a terrifying stat because, we have kids, we have brothers and sisters in this community. And if it's that high, the likelihood of somebody that we love or know, could be a victim of that. And that's something that would be devastating to us. But that when I saw the stat, it just horrified me. And like I said, I was hoping and praying that it's, a made up stat, right? Because you can skew statistics any way you want to. Yeah. But I don't know whether that's true or not. But like you said, if we're saying that it is true, then it's just a terrifying stat. And I would very well want to work with communities and whatever I can do to help lower that stat.
Because one of the misconceived notions that a lot of people have, I guess, particularly white people in this country, is that if you don't do anything wrong, then you have nothing to worry about, and you're never going to have a bad experience, and the cops will leave you alone, and this and that. And it's just not true. I mean, like I said, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. I went to a Catholic school. Not that means I didn't do bad stuff, but you know what I mean? I came from a good family. And I was harassed constantly. I mean, my brother and I were harassed constantly. You know, obviously I've never been arrested, never been charged, never any of that stuff, but pulled over for driving asking me whose car is this because it was a nice car. Followed to my house after I was given a ticket. Came to my house at 12:30 in the morning to say, oh, I need to change something on your ticket. Like my parents were like scared out of their mind. Rolled up on you, guns pulled on you. You don't even know why. You're like, I'm like 16, 17, you know, all those type of things. So I say that to say that, first of all, just to kind of debunk the idea that, you know, if you're not doing anything wrong, you don't have anything to worry about, but also kind of talking about reform, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, and reform is such a broad word and it means so many different things. And sometimes it really is something that needs to be more, tailored and specific to that particular department or that particular city, because there are issues that might be happening here that aren't necessarily happening in, I don't know, some other city in North Dakota or something. But one of the things that's come up recently is, you know, this movement to quote unquote defund the police. And I think, first of all, I want to speak on that a little bit because I think, and I want you to speak on it too. I think there's a notion that when people say that, that means that we're getting rid of every single police officer ever. Like, no, that's not necessarily what it means. It could mean that, but it more so means that we spend a lot of money out of each budget for police. And maybe there's a way to go and look at that and say, let's reallocate some of this money to education and some of the healthcare and some of the social services. Maybe not police aren't needed for every single thing that we use police for. So when you think about reform, what do you think about as an officer? Obviously, your job, you want to keep your job, but I think you also want things to be better.
Yeah. So I believe in just a annual evaluation. Everybody gets an evaluation. Systems should not be exempt. And I think that all of these systems need to be evaluated. If people want to defund the police, then they should take a look at it and see what makes sense, what needs to, stay, what needs to be removed. And then, legislators that we put in office do what they need to do. I am not for or against that. Mm-hmm. I do understand why people think it, but I do see the flip side of that. I don't want to have a lapse in my police services because, a certain thing has been defunded. But I do see the need for, better spending in our education systems and other places that need money more so than, law enforcement. I understand that. Right. So, and then, I just to address the first part of your question is, I'm sorry that happened to you and your brother. That's not right. And there's a lot of things that, again, we go back to V talking about the power that is unnecessary. You need to do your job properly. Probable cause and reasonable suspicion are the reasons that we do what we do. If you don't have that, then that doesn't need to be happening. Mm-hmm. You should go off the facts and go off the actions. You know. So I don't think those things are right. If you're doing it wrong, if you're harassing people just because of the color of the skin, that's not good, and it needs to change. And like I said, evaluation and looking at the whole situation, and then retraining or discipline, or you need to be fired. Period.
Absolutely.
Well, I wanted to touch specifically on the violence aspect. Right, America is obviously a very violent country. But within that, all the data and statistics point to, by and far, police departments throughout America being the most violent in terms of the actual death of citizens, right? I saw statistics that in a matter of days, there were more police killings in America than there were in the last 24 years in England and Wales. How do we fix kind of that problem, right? Like every police officer has a gun. We do have a brutality issue. We do have a violence issue where police are taking people's lives unnecessarily. The duty of police officers is to protect and serve and to deactivate a situation or calm it down. But it seems like in America, a lot of times the police come and add fuel to the fire versus putting that fire out. How do we fix that problem? Is it reducing the number of police officers with guns? Is it training? How do we kind of fix this obvious and glaring problem that we have throughout police departments in America?
I think that it is like you said, that is an American issue. It's been like this for a very, very long time. When you have a place where everyone can have guns, I mean, you see people's arsenals out here.
Yeah.
And the thing is that the government gives us an opportunity to help with that, and police the neighborhoods and things of that nature. I think it's going to be a group effort to make those changes. We got to have legislators look at these things. We got to have local council people, mayors, governors look at all of this stuff, take in the data, and then make the changes as needed. I'm just like you guys. I see this stuff on TV as well, where another person shot another. Now, on the flip side, though, a lot of times the media will drive a narrative that isn't necessarily true. And then when you see the other parts of what exactly happened, the whole story, you're like, well, dang, I'm glad the police were there because that person was setting up to do this or that. So a lot of times you have to see the whole story. But I agree with you that I think it is just a American issue. And then so you think about Wales and those countries over there, they don't even have guns.
Yeah, like 90% of the police don't carry guns.
Yeah, they don't carry guns at all. And I just think that's a different philosophy in policing. Their citizens would, unless you're in the military, they're like, you got a gun? Like what? Like wow? And it's just a different philosophy and way of life over there. And had we done that, if we had that over here, I'm sure it would be the same. I'm sure that the homicide rates would be lower, and people wouldn't be expected to be. But fortunately and unfortunately, this is America, and this is how we live. And definitely, I think the different branches of government are the way to go as far as getting those changes. I don't even know that having officers that walk around without guns would be a good idea, to be honest. Because I think there would be a mass exodus from law enforcement if that was the case. I know I would definitely not be doing that if they were like, yeah, nah, today, Hughes, you don't have a gun. You're working XYZ area, and we're looking for this suspect. Yeah, nah, no thanks.
Right.
I'm good.
Right.
I'm good.
Especially because I think, like you said, the way society has kind of become and developed, it's not. Yeah, go ahead, B.
Yeah, and I think that the issue isn't the fact that all police officers carry guns. It's
the power thing.
Power and making sure that power is checked consistently and constantly, because just the ability, just like if you have a gun at home and you never shoot it, you're not gonna necessarily know how to use it. Right. And also, just even when you get a gun, the training that they give you that this is self-defense.
Correct.
Only. It's not meant to be a weapon to be an aggressor.
Right.
I think that's kind of the issue that comes. It's not good police who have a head on their shoulders having a gun in case some shit goes down.
Right.
It's police who have that gun, and now that power trip comes in, and it's like the first thing they think to is go to their gun versus all the other steps that you should take before you go to your gun as a police officer, because the moment you pull your gun, that escalates the situation.
Absolutely.
And your job is to de-escalate the situation. I think that's what we need to tackle is how do we better manage our police officers with guns, knowing what that comes with, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And a lot of that comes down to training as well. We need to be better trained and in training more often and put in stress-based situations so that you are more prepared when you do go out there. My agency does an amazing job with us, and it is constant. There's training all the time, And you know, in the shootings that I've heard of and know of, they've been legitimate. From a training standpoint, from a tactical standpoint, from a legal standpoint. And I agree with you. People that are, you know, out there using their guns as just an aggressive tactic and using them the wrong way, they need to face justice, just like any other American citizen would. And you know, that is a goal that I've seen and heard that people want, is that you know, if police officers are going to do criminal acts, then they need to be treated as such. And that's something that I agree with, because you know, it needs to be fair. It needs to be fair. And you know, there's some people that will say, well, if a police officer had to use their gun, then they were in the right. Well, we've seen videos across the country that show that is wrong. That is wrong. And each situation is evaluated differently. At the same time, though, if you've done something, you know, a heinous act, then you need to go, you know, be charged and go to jail and prison.
And Chris, that type of sentiment and that type of acknowledgement, again, I said this earlier, and I'm gonna say it again because it's important. I think if we were to hear that, we as citizens were to hear that more often from police officers, our kind of impression of policing and even our hope for what policing could be, I think would be substantially different. I mean, at the end of the day, when we see something and we watch it for 9 minutes, and then you try to tell us that we didn't see what we saw, or you can't even acknowledge, you know, I can understand the perspective, like, listen, we don't know everything that happened. Right. You know, let's use caution. I get that. I'm a lawyer. I understand that. Right. But when you're trying to actually tell us that we didn't see something that we know we saw, then that's also adds to the quote unquote mistrust, not just the mistrust that's happening in interpersonal situations, but overall. And then that's when people say, listen, bad apples spoil the whole bunch. So yeah, maybe all of you guys aren't the ones that are doing the killing, but you guys are kind of in a gang. Some people say, like, legalized gang, where you guys all, like you said, no snitching, and it's kind of just this code, and that builds mistrust. And so that leads me to kind of my next question, which is about protests. And I think that, you know, you've been very candid with us, and first of all, I want to thank you again for that. But I think that even the protests kind of, I want to get your opinion on it, because on one hand, it sounds like you understand certain outrage that people have and the pain and disgust that people have, but you also know that, you know, you, for example, personally are a guy who's in this trying to do the right thing. And theoretically, you know, you could be in more danger now if people just kind of lump you into everything that's going on. Sure. So how do you even evaluate these protests, given the fact that you're Black, given the fact that you do understand, but also given the fact that you're a law enforcement officer and want to see things be better from that standpoint?
So I say this is my position as a Black law enforcement officer is one of the toughest positions to be in this country. And I just say that from experience, being on the front lines of a protest like I was these past couple of weeks. It's tough to see people with so much hurt, anger, and pain. And in order for us to try to, you know, protect people and property, it's just a mind-boggling and terrifying situation for people to be in on both sides. The protests, I support the peaceful protests. I'm glad they're doing it. I'm glad they're out here. I'm glad they're fighting for, change. I'm glad they're fighting for that change. Obviously, you know, I don't support the damaging of people's property. Soul Classics, one of the awesome stores in the short, got super destroyed, and that was one of my spots. You know, right. But it's just like, it's a very tough time. But and then I come home and have to explain to my family, like, you know, this is why I'm doing what I do, and I support, you know, what people are doing, protesting peacefully, because, you know, I watched that video of George Floyd lose his life too, and I immediately I mean, my heart hurt watching that. One, because a human being lost his life, and then, and his family lost him. And then two, because somebody that wears a shield like me was the one, taking his life. And just thought immediately about the backlash that was coming. I mean, it's still hard for me to talk about right now just because it's just the visual, and it was probably one of the worst things, that everybody has seen. And even my 14-year-old, when, or 13, when she tells me like, yeah, and now she inspires me by her version of protest through social media. I love her more for it. Yeah. But it's just it was such a heinous act, and I'll tell you, people in my agency, there is not one person that supports that, not one. And people have been vocally coming out and saying that they do not support that, and that it was a crime. It was a crime, and that's every race. That's every race, and they've come out and said that. So that for me is a big deal for the place that I work for, because there are some places, I know I read something on social media where there was a I don't know what they call, like a order down in Florida that was telling the Atlanta Six and the Minnesota officers that, hey, once y'all beat the charges, come work for us. And I'm like, that just blew my mind. Like, are you kidding me? Right. So
yeah, and I think that actually happened already with the officer that shot Tamir Rice. He got a job in another department.
Yep.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Quickly.
Yeah.
But as a citizen, you can see the disappointment to be like, oh, so it's okay. I mean, it's like a validation.
That's where the mistrust comes in. Right?
Absolutely.
It's like, it seems like the voices of reason, or voices like yours, aren't the voices that are heard. And oftentimes when something happens, the police and the district attorney stay quiet, right? Yeah. Like, they don't take the time to understand that this is a community issue and they need to address the community. And I had two questions circling back to the protests and riots, right?
Yep.
As far as the responsibility, again, of police officers in those situations, right? It's a very difficult position.
Yeah.
Obviously, but it seems like you don't control the decision making, but when the first thing that happens when protests happen is that a bunch of police come out in riot gear with tear gas, that's a psychological signal too, that it's us against them. And I've seen you join protests, and it seems like that would be a much better way to handle this, is to say, hey, as a community, we're all suffering. Right. We're part of your community. Why is that? Is it a fear thing? So
I think honestly, it's a training thing. So when A, B, and C happen, riot gear goes on, and this is the procedure. So, but over the course of days, you go, hey, this isn't working. Right. This isn't working. Right. Let's try a different approach. So when the initial thing isn't working, and both sides are, stalemating, you have to try a different strategy, just like chess. If you stalemating with somebody game and game, you have to try a different strategy. So ultimately, the different strategy ended up being to work together, whether march together, whether have a meal together, whether, have a meeting together. Those are things that seem to be working for different cities, and you have to try a different approach. Because sometimes, like you said, that when people see riot gear, there's a fear. Yep. One, there's there's anger that goes with it, because, they're like, oh, so they coming out to hurt us, and we out here peaceful protesting. And then, of course, you have the people who are not peaceful protesters, and they're chucking stuff, bricks and scooters and bottles of bodily fluid. You know, that ain't right either. You know, so I to your point though, I see how it looks like us against them because essentially it is. And like I said, you have to change that approach though. You have to. And for me though, a lot of people were like, well, why didn't y'all come out here first? And I heard that a lot. Y'all should have came out here first to talk to us, to come and talk to us. And to that, I said to a lot of people like, well, you weren't ready to listen. And I don't think that anything I could have said after watching that, because of the emotion of everyone that saw that. And it was just bad. And then it doesn't take a lot of it. Like you guys have said, you know, one apple spoils spoil the whole bunch. If one peaceful protester chucks a brick, all that goes out the window. And you're stopping a riot at that point. Yeah. So, and that's our job. That is our job, you know. So, you know, y'all pay us to do that, to stop them from destroying the city, you know. But I agree with you. There are different tactics and different methods. But you go with what the training is first, and then what that chain of command decides to do. So,
and the second question that I had on something you touched on was being an officer of color specifically, right? It seems like that comes with a unique psychological challenge, right? In the sense that I've seen officers of color who almost feel like they're challenged from both sides, right? In the sense that
there's no almost. That's a fact.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
You're on one hand, you find officers who are trying to, you know, like they said in the NWA song, black officer showing out for the white cop, right? You have that element, and then you have the other side of it, which is your community sometimes looks at you or does look at you like,
oh yeah,
sell out,
right?
You know?
Right.
How do you balance that, and how do we kind of fix that issue on both sides? Because it does create issues within officers in how they police, and it creates issues on the opposite side within the community, that mistrust.
So, one thing to add to that, V. I don't know if you've seen the video out of Atlanta of the 6 officers that pulled the college students out of the car, brutalized them, tased them. That was actually my cousin. And that was something that just happened like last week. And I think 5 of the 6 officers were black officers. And so there's also a dynamic too that I think, you know, to piggyback what V's saying, that where a lot of people don't understand, like, well, why are you saying it's racism? But there's, you know, black cops are doing this stuff too. So I just wanted to throw that out there also as you answer that's another kind of dimension to this too that I wonder if you deal with.
So yes, as a black officer, we get a lot of flack because we are the community we serve. It's just a hard place to be, but you got to have thick skin. I mean, to do this job, you have to have thick skin. There's days that are better than others. But I've been called all kind of everything. And, but that's something that all law enforcement face. I mean, it's a little more sensitive for us though, because it's, I guess to lack a better phrase, your people, you know what I mean? Like my own people doing this to me. But I understand the flip side, that as the law enforcement, they're saying my own people doing this to me. So it's kind of just a middle of the road issue. And, but whenever I get a chance though, whether I make an arrest, whether I'm just having a community event, I like to talk to people because I want to dispel any misconceptions on the community side. And then when I have a time to sit down with officers I don't know, I want to sit down and talk to them as well. Because, I mean, there's a lot of Q&A that goes on for both sides. When, if I sit down with a non-minority officer and they got questions for me, I want to get them the answer so they're more informed, or I sit down with because I've had, I've had family members question me and be like, you know, just mad, like, why are y'all doing this? Why are y'all doing this? And then I'll explain. And then I'll also tell them at the same time what I think is right and what I think is wrong. So there's a lot of just conversations that need to happen, and then just you know, being real about it. And if you know something is wrong, man, just call it out. You got to call it out when it's wrong. And you know, those officers down in Atlanta, you know, when I saw that, I just oh my gosh, what is going on? You know, we're trained a certain way. We don't do what they did. And you know, when people see those actions though done by the police, they think all police do that. And every jurisdiction and department is trained differently, and statewide, different states are trained differently. And I think ours is one of the best in the country. And, you know, I think we got the stuff to back that up as well. But it's just it's a hard place to be, man, being a African-American police officer, and even with your family and your wife, your kids, and you come home and immediately this is what we talk about. And it's like, oh gosh, I just was doing this for 12 hours and now here we go, you know, but it's something that needs to happen though, because they want understanding too. And I love that. I need for more understanding to happen and more people to speak out about stuff that's wrong. And when it's right, let's celebrate the wins too. Let's celebrate the when the community does come together, when there is peace, let's celebrate that as well. So that's my take.
Yeah. Well, Chris, look, you're an excellent example of what law enforcement can be. And I think that was one of the reasons why we wanted to bring you on the show. First of all, I appreciate you being as candid as you've been. And believe it or not, these type of conversations, I think, do provide context to a lot of people who are hurting and potential healing and hope. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have hope, then what do you have? Right. And I think that's essentially what people in our communities and across the country want is hope. So we know you got to go. We want to get you out of here. We're going to switch subjects, do something totally different and fun, lighten up the mood. We do this a lot on our show, just to, you know, humanize people a little bit and also give people a chance to kind of tell us who they are. All right. So the first question I want to ask you is your top 5 musicians of all time. So who are the artists that even when you were growing up or now, are people that have inspired you throughout your life?
Number 1 should be NWA.
Nah, so I guess number 1 for me is just Outkast. Like, just I love them dudes, man. And together or separate. So that's number 1 for me. Yeah. I'll go Tupac second. I'll go Biggie third. And then let's get into some new juice. So I'll get with Kendrick. Okay. I'll get Kendrick, and then let's see. I gotta throw a little R&B in there. So let's say I don't know. There's so many. I'll go old school and throw in Marvin Gaye. Let's do that.
Yeah, there we go.
Let's do that. Let's do that.
All right, cool. And then we got one more.
Your top 5 athletes.
Oh, okay. All right. Got to do Jordan. I'm a basketball head, man. So I'll do Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and then we'll go football. I'll go Barry Sanders and Mike Singletary.
Wow. Yeah. I like that list.
Nice
Chris,
mix.
Man, yeah. Yo, once again, man, seriously, thank you so much for joining us on the Untitled Boys podcast. This has been very, very helpful, even for me, because I think part of what people don't realize is that everybody is hurting, like you said, including some of you guys, the officers as well. And so these conversations are therapeutic in a way, because I think you don't, part of us feel powerless. We don't know what to do. We don't know what to say. But I think sometimes these conversations are important because they help just clear the air, and then gives you a better sense of clarity as you move forward in terms of the type of things that need to be done and where you can potentially attack. So
I think this is also a unique opportunity, right? Because the timing of all of this probably couldn't have. It's terrible, but it couldn't have been better in the sense that people are actually paying attention. Right. And the first step is acknowledgement, right? We do have issues in our community, but we also really do have issues in our police departments across the country. And what we need to do is tackle them and address them and fix them aggressively. And the only way we're going to do that is by working together and actually having these conversations.
So
I'm
true.
going to give you the last word. If there's anything that you want to say, you know, if it's to the people or reassurance or anything that, you know, if you don't have anything, it's fine. You said plenty. But, you know, I think that people are going to really, really enjoy hearing from you.
Yeah. So I will say this. So if you get a chance, people read Micah 6:8. It's from the Bible. That's how I choose the police. And then just know that peace and love always conquers. So it may take time. It may take a while, but peace and love for sure.
That's perfect, man. Thank you so much, man.
Yep.
Enjoy your day. Be safe out there. Obviously, we're going to be praying for you, man.
Good seeing y'all, man.
All right, man.
All right.
Stay safe.
All right. Take care.
Love the Pilot Boys podcast? Support us on Patreon. Supporters can pledge as little as $1, and we have some cool perks on there. Check out www.patreon.com/Pilot Boys podcast. Show us some love today.
You're listening to the Pilot Boys podcast, episode 32. Time to hit some news and notes. V, but before we hit some news and notes, let's talk a little bit about that interview that we just had with Chris Hughes, police officer in Ohio. I thought it was riveting, honestly, because I think, you know, and I told him this also, is that part of what this country and this society needs, particularly when it comes to this issue of police brutality and police killings, is honesty. And we need honesty and transparency from the departments and empathy. And when you don't hear officers come out and say that they think things are wrong, or then it just kind of it ruins your idea of what this thing can be, and it gives you less hope. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, it's that, and I think people like him are unfortunately rare, right?
Mm-hmm.
He has a college degree. He thought about what he wanted to do, and he actually is interested in tackling these issues, and that's part of the reason he's in the police force. It's not just a job to him, right?
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that people like him aren't thanked more than they are, and it is a thankless job. But you know, when change happens, a lot of people don't. If you're doing it for credit, then it's not the job for you, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely appreciate people like him and other officers like him, I'm sure, that exist in police departments throughout the country. And he did highlight just how difficult the challenge is. You know, and acknowledging the issue is the first step, but acknowledging issues that are this deep and this troubling requires a lot of work to change. And hopefully, you know, we're at the start of the process to actually start making some of these changes.
Well, speaking of that, let's talk about the concept of like defunding the police. That's kind of the new kind of hot button topic that's being talked about across the country. I particularly wanted to bring it up because, first of all, I wanted to just discuss the concept, but I also wanted to clarify the concept for a lot of people who don't necessarily understand it. When you hear defunding the police, in a lot of people's minds, it's like a shock to the conscience. It means like we're getting rid of all police officers and they're just going to be, everyone just wants crime to run rampant. And it's like, no, that's not what defunding the police means. And maybe it could be branded better, but it's important to actually research, and you can find these things fairly easily. Essentially means that how we kind of reimagine how we view police in general in society, and understand that police are just one part of kind of the overall health and wellness of a community. And there are a lot of other things that matter in terms of budgeting. When you're talking about budgeting for a particular area or community, how are you allocating your budget? And the reality is that police departments overwhelmingly have a substantial amount of the budget, much more of a budget in communities than education does, and healthcare, and maybe social services and different external programs. There are a lot of other ways where you can imagine a budget. And that's what they mean when they say defunding the police, is going to each kind of situation, department, a city, a circumstance, and see what is actually necessary and how can we reallocate some of these funds to let other segments of our society police our society. What are your thoughts on kind of the concept of defunding the police, and I guess maybe just its rollout in terms of the messaging and branding?
I think that The messaging definitely could be better in how they're rolling this out, because people are very confused on what they mean, because some people think it means getting rid of the police and abolishing the police, and that's not what's happening. But, to understand this issue, you kind of have to understand one of the major issues that governments at all levels have is inefficient use of funds, right?
Yep.
And when you look at the numbers for police, it's staggering, right? Looking at the data from an article I read from The Guardian, essentially in the last 4 decades, the cost of policing has tripled. And it's a nationwide cost of $115 billion. And why that doesn't make sense specifically is that crime overall in that same time frame has declined, right?
Yeah.
And then they break it down into certain cities.
Well, let me say this real quick on that point, because some people are going to say, well, of course it's gone down because we have more police. But there are also studies that show, particularly in New York, when they stopped the stop and frisk thing, that showed that actually crime continued to go down when you removed police completely from certain situations. So it doesn't mean that police cause crime per se, but it does mean that sometimes we over-police certain situations, certain environments, certain types of crimes that don't necessarily require the type of policing that we have today. So it's kind of a reimagining of how we police in general.
Yeah. And and then looking at these budgets specifically city by city, in LA, for example, the police account for more than 50% of the city's budget. So when we go and we want to attack and address these deeper issues of how do we police the police, when you give somebody that much of the budget, and you give them that's power in capitalism, right? And so when they have this large of a budget, it does take away from other things that are more important, right? I think everyone would agree that having better schools is important. Having more community initiatives and services is more important than just having more people around to police and prevent. That's actually kind of almost anti-American. Whenever you listen to our propaganda when we talked about other countries and places, oh, it's a police state. Oh, the people don't have the power. Well, in America, you do essentially are saying the police have the power, at least at the city level, because they have the most money, they have the most resources, and therefore they have the most power. And that's a very, very, very troubling thing that we need to address. Defunding is definitely not just a conversation, it's mandatory, right? Because right now we are operating inefficiently at the city level. How do we reallocate that efficiently? And also, one last thing that I'll say is that you'll find, and you brought this point up, policing isn't the only way to prevent crime. It's if you create an economy and you help to create an economy and you create services to help people who potentially think about doing crime, give them services that allow them to avoid that path, that also will reduce crime, and that's been proven.
Well, you just touched on something
throughout the world.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on the psychology, right? The question, a lot of times, and we always talk about this. We always care about the why more than the what. Obviously, the what matters, but the why is very important. Why do people commit crime? Why do people find themselves in certain situations? And the reality is that a lot of people find themselves in certain situations because they don't have, or at least feel like they have, alternatives, or they don't have proper education, or they don't have proper resources. Some people will do bad things regardless, but that's, you have people who have, Bernie Madoff, and people who have billions who's still going to do bad things. But the point is that there are other ways to imagine policing. Policing doesn't just mean, oh, I go and arrest you. And, I think everyone thinks that, oh my God, we take cops off the street, everything's going to go up. It's like, no, there are a lot of things that officers do that shouldn't even necessarily be in their purview. And that's why I think another important thing, and we could talk about this all day, but I at least want to mention it, is I think it's important that everyone goes and watches 13th, which is a documentary on Netflix done by Ava DuVernay, essentially that talks about kind of policing, criminal justice, the prison industrial complex, all of these things, and how the actual economics behind it and who's actually benefiting from over policing and more people being put in jail. Not even from a racial component, obviously, but even deeper than that. And I think that when you start to see those things, you start to realize, like, wow, maybe my concept of what I thought policing was overall and the reasons for it aren't exactly what they actually are. So obviously,
and this is the thing, like, you know, I think it's important, you know, I think 13th is great to watch, but it's important for America as a whole to understand that this isn't just a Black American issue, right? Defunding the police benefits everyone, right? And I think defunding, I don't even want to use that, reallocating resources from the police. And the reason that economy exists, and this is the truth throughout capitalism, is because the people as a whole tend to not be paying attention and not care until a situation like this arises where we're forced to face it. And I think there's a great opportunity. But when the people do take notice, we have to remember our elected officials, our city officials, they're all elected by us. So they have to do what we demand. It's one thing for them not to address the issue because they're monetizing it, because it's being ignored by the rest of us voting citizens. That's why it's so crucial for us to take this topic and address it at our local levels, at every local level throughout the country, and demand change. Because if we demand change, they have to change it.
Yeah. And I think, you know, speaking of funding, I guess it's a good segue into Michael Jordan, right? And George Floyd. And Michael Jordan's not the only one. I think, but Michael Jordan, you know, he came out with a statement, and he shied away, or at least in our minds, from publicly being political, or, you know, but maybe this isn't even a political issue. And in his mind, he said, look, enough is enough. This is essentially the tipping point. He spoke out against, obviously, racial injustice and said it's been going on for far too long. And then also has pledged $100 million to different organizations that, you know, fight for social justice. You know, what are your impressions on that? You know, what are your impressions on Michael Jordan? Again, you know, he's a guy that we've always said is not political, and he does, all he cares about is sales. But this seems like a different Michael Jordan than what's been portrayed.
Well, I think Chris said it earlier in his interview, right? Like, everyone has flaws, and everyone has blind spots. I think with Michael Jordan, I think a lot of stuff that he's done, he hasn't done to get the stuff he does in the community. He doesn't do it and draw attention to it. So he's been doing a lot in communities, and, you know, he's experienced it. He talked about it on The Last Dance. Part of his reason for wanting to be a basketball player is to get the hell out of the racist town he lived in North Carolina. So, you know, and what this shows is that what I think America needs to understand is that there's no escaping this for Black Americans, right? It doesn't matter if you're Michael Jordan. It doesn't matter if you're the most famous, if you're LeBron James. You know, I personally witnessed LeBron being handcuffed by police for no reason at all, outside of a nightclub. He hadn't been drinking. He hadn't been doing anything. So these are issues that you can't escape with money. And in America, you say, well, money is the cure-all for all, but it's not. And I think part of this is Jordan understanding that this is happening to people in my family. This has happened to me, and it's not right. And then the second part of this is, you know, we talked about this last week, is that the Jordan brand, the reason he's a billionaire is in large part, I won't say large part, but has a lot to do with Black culture accepting the Jordan brand as one of the preeminent brands. That's pretty much the domino that leads to all the other markets of the Jordan brand being successful. So if you are the Jordan brand, if you are Nike, and if you are any brand, music industry is talking about this too, who generates revenue and makes money off of Black Americans, you better start giving to these causes, and you better start speaking up and using your platform for change, because your platform is way bigger than the community activists platform. That's just the nature of America. So I'm very happy Jordan's doing this, and I think it should be a trigger for many other companies to do it as well. Yeah.
So let's switch topics. Let's talk about basketball. Now, our NBA. Obviously, we're talking about Jordan. Let's talk about the NBA. The NBA is returning at the end of July 31st. There's some questions for why they chose that date. I heard Jalen Rose say something that I thought was interesting, which is that, you know, someone basically said, why don't just start now? Why are we waiting until July 31st. And he said he's heard that they're essentially expecting another wave of COVID. And so this time frame gives them a chance for another wave to come in and potentially get flattened again by the time that they would start the season. So I thought that was interesting. Essentially going to be 22 teams in a bubble in Disney and Orlando. What are your thoughts about kind of the season restarting and kind of how do we evaluate, the results of this season? Do we put an asterisk next to it, or do we give it the same weight of championships in the past?
Yeah, there are two things I want to say. First, just addressing the fact that you do have to complete the season, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's possible if you have a business, you complete the season, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's done in a safe way. That's great. I mean, I do think, forever there always going to be asterisks around certain things. When a team wins a championship in a lockout shortened season, for example, there is going to be a population of people say, well, there's an asterisk next to it. It's not the same as going through a full 82 game season. But I do think that the NBA is owed our trust more so than any other league that we have, because they've shown time and time again that they take action, that they're going to do things and think things through. Adam Silver is the best commissioner in sports. Both of you and I agree on that. So let's trust it. Let's enjoy it. But I also think the NBA specifically, right? I'm not sure what the most recent number is, but they have a huge platform, and you're seeing all these NBA players coming out, Russell Westbrook in Compton. This also provides a huge opportunity to educate and magnify the movement that's happening in America that I'm excited about as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it because I think, first of all, we need sports, right? I mean, not to say that we shouldn't be dealing with the issues of the day to day, right? The hard stuff. But we also do need escapes from it, even from your own mental health. You do need escapes from some of the hard stuff, and so I think it coming back is good. Baseball's also talking about coming back with a shortened season, I think 75 to 80 games, and there's some issues with figuring out how they're going to pay their players and pro rata paying and all that type of stuff. It looks like a lot of team or leagues are trying to figure out ways to come back. And speaking of that, the NCAA football, it looks as though NCAA football has a real shot of having a season this year. Maybe not with fans or full capacity, but we have guys back on campus. For example, Ohio State is back on campus for voluntary workouts all across the country. But yeah, it seems as though, we're trying to get back to normal. There's all kinds of data emerging that maybe we flattened it and, it's not going to necessarily come back the way we thought, or, it's still developing. But what are your thoughts on kind of football, college football again, returning in and what issues we have to deal with that?
I'm okay with preparing for a season, right? But I'm still not. Look, America has the most cases and most deaths from this virus in the world. I understand we have to reopen the economy. We have to do things, but I'm telling you, I'm seeing a sense of typical reaction, right? Which is, well, people are sick of it, so let's just
declare it over.
Let's declare it over, and whatever happens. Whoever dies.
Right.
But I don't understand how this thing was such a huge concern. We had to socially distance ourselves 3 weeks ago, and now it seems like, well, let's open everything up. And the second concern that I have with opening everything up again is that are we all going to be so distracted by our distractions and all these things coming back that we're not taking it seriously? I know myself, when I go to Kroger, I'm not seeing people wear masks as much, or people or people taking the care. When you start signaling that everything is okay, right? Football's back, basketball's back. So everything's back to normal. Let me go out, not wash my hands. Let me, rub my face. Is that an issue? And I'm going to ask you that question. Are you concerned about that? And then also distracting from these important social issues that we're having. How do you think bringing back all of these things, hobbies and sports and entertainment, may impact that?
So the crazy thing is, I feel like there's a spectrum of where people are on, particularly when it comes to COVID, right? I think there's some people that say this is a hoax, all the way to people saying this is the worst thing that we've ever seen in society, and we shouldn't open back up until there's a vaccine, right? And then there's a lot of in between, and then there's a lot of nuance, right? And then there's a lot of circumstantial kind of analysis, right? The analysis for a gym, for example, may not be the analysis for a daycare, which may not be analysis for the NBA, which may not be analysis for college basketball, right? Yeah. So it's like we're kind of trusting all of the leaders in each individual industry to make the proper decisions according to the data that they have.
Yeah.
One thing that you touched on, which I think is scary, is a lot of people don't have the ability or the time to necessarily analyze every single circumstance. So, for example, the risk of going to a grocery store versus going to a gym versus going to a game might be 3 different risks. But if I don't know if everyone has necessarily the capability to understand what those risks are. So a lot of times we are trusting the people in leadership to kind of evaluate those risks. But what I am seeing, and what I do think is honestly true, is that there's some people who have accepted easier than others that, look, man, people are going to die from this thing, period. You got to figure out a way to live with it. Wash your hands, wear a mask or socially distance, and just, it is what it is. And I understand that because I understand kind of understanding that disease happens in society, right? This isn't the only disease or that kills people.
And then the frustration of months and months of having your lifestyle
100%, which is part of what people don't realize about the protest. Part of the protest is not just George Floyd. Obviously, that's a huge issue, and he was a spark, and police brutality was a spark. But you also have people who are frustrated, people who are unemployed, people who don't like the leadership, don't like what's happening in government. Well, there's a lot of factors that mixed into this. So I think, here's what I will say. With all first of all, there are a lot of protests where people are wearing masks. There's somebody told me they're at a protest in Ohio where like 90% of people have masks on. So that doesn't mean that people aren't getting COVID or spreading it, but that's just important to note. But I think with all of these large gatherings that we've seen from the protests and people who are actually willing to risk their lives or their health because they believe in such a cause, we're going to see in the next few weeks or months, whether or not there's another wave. And we have to be ready for, like you said, either situation. If there's not, then we got to kind of get back to normal, and not normal, but we got to get back to, operating. And obviously, like you said, keeping precautions. But eventually people are going to let their guard down when they start to see, like you said, things opening back up and people not, they're going to, energy creates energy. I know myself, I could be in a certain environment and do something that I wouldn't have typically done if the energy of that environment wasn't like that. Right. Yeah. So that's one scary thing. But I think, at this point, the curve is flattened. That's pretty much true across the board. There are probably some places where it's going up and stuff like that. But for the most part, the curve in the United States is flattened. Many cities aren't dealing with the type of, New York City had a day where I don't think they had any COVID deaths. That's crazy for as big as New York is. So you kind of got to move forward. But I do think this is a constant analysis. I do not think, it's over. I think it's a constant analysis, a constant reevaluation. So we'll see.
Yeah, and moving, my main thing is just exercising caution and moving with caution and continuing to highlight the risks of this thing, right? As long as you're doing that and you're not just kind of, and this is the issue that I have with media, it's like, it seems like their narratives change according to the mood of society. So even what people are going to rely on for the information that they use to make decisions isn't it kind of goes with the times too. What's popular, what's moving the needle at this point. So it's what's tough for me is what is the reliable information, because you were telling me one thing 2 weeks ago, and now you're telling me something different. So that's the hard part of this thing. But I do think having sports for the people who are playing sports and involved with that economy, they must try to figure out how do they do that. But as long as you have to figure it out. As long as you're doing it and you're thinking about safety first, especially at college. Pros, as we've always said, is different. but
Yeah.
there's a different level of care that you have to take when these guys aren't getting paid. And the only people benefiting financially are you, right? So there's a different level.
Let me say one last thing on the virus, which I think is important to understand, is that people are frustrated, understandably so, about when new data emerges or new studies emerge or whatever, and it seemingly contradicts something that you feel like you've heard before. And we've talked to you and I both have talked to physicians about this in our family and outside of our family, who essentially said this: listen, this thing is still developing. This thing is changing. There are different factors that can change things including weather, that can change things over the course of viruses. So just because something was true, a month ago, and it's not necessarily true today, doesn't mean that it was wrong information at the time. It just means that things have changed and developed. The issue, I think, is that the people who are giving some of this information haven't necessarily branded that part of it that well, which is when they're presenting information, it's almost like, this is the data, this is what we need to do, this is what you need to do, without also saying, like, listen, things can change rapidly with this thing. Understand that this is just the best available data that we have at the time, but this is very new. This is novel. Studies are being done. There's certain things that we're seeing in this state or this country are different than we're seeing here. Like, let people understand that, and which they haven't done. But let's move on from that real quick, because I wanted to get to something that happened this week when the Democrats returned, senators, when they returned to work. They did a gesture that's been kind of a hot topic, obviously, on social media, where they knelt for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in honor of George Floyd's life. But they also did so in kente cloth. And when I saw it, I tweeted, "Stop the charades and get back to work. Like, we don't need that, And it reminded me that, like, it's so frustrating to say this because, these are elected officials and that type of thing, and you kind of expect more out of them. But it just seems as though politicians, and obviously not everyone and all that stuff, but they just giving us bullshit, man, and charades and lip service and putting on shows. Like, what the issues are, and don't act like you just need the George Floyd situation to know what the issues are. What are you actually doing? And and some people are trying. I don't want to say nobody's trying, because I hate when people say that. It's not true. There are people who are trying. There are people who try to get things passed and they get blocked. Those things do happen. But get shit done. I mean, I don't know. At the end of the day, I don't want to see the charade. Just get shit done.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? And this is where there's so much mistrust of our politicians. Is yesterday was a charade, right? You have a whole bunch of white Democrats in election year trying to prove to a voter base that they care about them. But this has been the issue, right? For political parties forever with minority communities, and specifically the Black community, is that's what it is. It's a charade. You guys say what you need to do, put on a show to win political points and gain our votes. But when it actually comes to doing something real, yeah, it's great that you sympathize with us. You feel sorry for what we're going through, but what the fuck are you doing? Because you go into office and those issues get to the bottom of the list, no matter who's in office and who's in power, until they're forced to deal with them. And that just shows you what they care about, right? It's almost like, wow, you guys just really want to prove that you're down, right? Versus proving that you are elected officials that know how to address and fix issues. Like, nobody needs to see that you're with the cause as an elected official. And it's just very, very disheartening. And it shows again how much room we have to improve in America, and how wide the disconnect is. Because if you had any sort of sense of connectivity, that's not how you would approach this scenario.
Absolutely not. I agree with you 100%. And then, you also have Mitt Romney marching with Black Lives Matter protesters, and who knows what the value of that is. But it's just interesting time in our political day, and like you said, we have to start really, really holding people accountable. And speaking of accountability, I guess the last thing we'll talk about before we get out of here is, we've gotten a lot of feedback on last week's show with kind of how we addressed our white America and our white friends, and kind of the obligation of white America moving forward as it pertains to these particular racial issues. What are some of your kind of thoughts on that? I mean, I know we spoke on it a little bit last week, but let's touch on it again, because I think a lot of people actually enjoyed it, and I've gotten a lot of feedback. They enjoyed hearing it from us.
Yeah. I think we should specifically talk about white people who care, right? Mm-hmm. Because the truth in our country is there's still a population of everybody who has the right, you have the right not to care, right? Mm-hmm. Supposedly. It may not be in your best interest, but you have the right not to. Mm-hmm. But if you care, right? And I'm seeing this a lot is on social media, you're making posts. A lot of people are making posts on social media. They're lending their voice to the cause. Mm-hmm. And I think the responsibility that you have is to first understand the issue. Like you mentioned earlier, watching 13th. I know for a fact that the majority of people who watch things like that are people from the community who are impacted more than it is from the majority, right? And why white people are important is you do represent the majority in this country. And for change to happen in a democratic political system, the majority has to want it. So I don't want your voices to dial down, but also your voice matters. Just let's be frank. Your voice matters more than a person of color's voice matters in this country right now. So you have to use that platform to level the playing field however you can. Writing your mayor, writing your police commissioner. If the majority of voices are your voices and they look like you, just to be honest, change will happen.
Yeah. And I think that's right. And I think some of this takes courage, right? I think some people don't know what to do, right? And they've like I've had friends hit me up. Again, I said this last week, but I'll say it again. I've had friends hit me up asking what to do. I think the first thing is just be courageous, right? Like I said, I think the first thing is self-examination. Understand who are you? What have you been impacted by? What biases have you allowed to enter your mind and body consciously and subconsciously? How have you personally dealt with issues of race and understanding issues of race and understanding different cultures? So that's one. And then I think there's a lot of research you can do there in terms of just understanding the history of people, their roots. Go read Roots or watch Roots. You mentioned 13th. Like I said, go look up Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Not just the Martin Luther King that has been whitewashed.
Don't Google Martin Luther King quotes.
Right. Actually, go listen to some of his policy suggestions and there's a lot of actual research that you can do. And then in terms of actions, you mentioned, I think it's substantial. Some of the things you said are awesome. People don't think that that's enough. You don't have to go like tear the whole city down to be effective. You can, write your local officials. Obviously, voting is something that's always important. You can, express your displeasure on social media and in your social circles. Shut people down who say or do certain things. Share information with people that you may be privy to that they may not be privy to. There's a lot that can be done here. And
if you understand constitutional law or how government works, think of look at things. See if there are ways that you can propose things or fix things, right? Because also, if you are a professional, you will be taken more seriously. And I also think, the last thing that I'll say on this is that we have to look at this as this isn't just something that's going to help the Black community, because it's going to help our entire. That's the way I look at it, right? Improving the relationship with the Black community in America improves the well-being and happiness of the entire country, right?
And that's spot on. And not to cut you off, but I think this is important. I tweeted this the other day too. Imagine how many, inventions or thoughts and creative ideas that we've been deprived of as a society, right? Things that we enjoy, because all the things that we enjoy aren't things that white people created. All of the things that we've been deprived of from people who've gotten their life stopped short, or people who haven't had the opportunity. Imagine all of the creative people in different segments of society who haven't had opportunity and what they could bring to society if they were given opportunity. And I think that your point is spot on. This isn't just a thing about we should care about Black people. It's all society should care about it, how we're treating all of our citizens, and understanding that if everybody's happy or if everybody's being attended to, that creates a better society for everybody. And so that's what I wholeheartedly believe we should aspire to do. So that's all we have today for news and notes. You're listening to Pilot Boys Podcast, episode 32. Shout out to Premier Podcast for getting us set up with our podcast during this quarantine period. Make sure you guys check them out for all of your podcast needs at premierpodcast.com. And make sure you check them out on social media at Premier Podcast. That's all we have for today's show. Big thanks to our guest, Chris Hughes. Thanks to everybody for listening. Don't forget, sharing is caring. Subscribe to the Pilot Boys Podcast on Apple, Spotify, Patreon, and YouTube. And please follow us on social media at Pilot Boys Pod on Twitter and at Pilot Boys Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. Also follow the hosts on Twitter. I am at Mechadon Music and V is at Viswan. And don't forget to grab some Pilot Boys wristbands at shop.pilotboys.com.
Always remember, be you. You is fly.
Pilot Boys out.
Pilot boys, we get on up.